Gabriel Asher had ridden to the end of England to be rid of a woman, and he opened the cottage door without knocking because a man did not knock to dismiss a servant. Then he stopped on the threshold with the cold spring wind at his back, and every word he had rehearsed across 200 miles of bad road went out of him like breath off a window. There was a fire. There was a low stool drawn close to it. And on the stool sat a woman with chestnut hair coming loose from its pins, and a child of perhaps a year on her knee, dark-headed, sturdy, gumming a silver rattle with a fierceness that bent his whole small body to the work of it. The woman held a bowl of bread and milk balanced on her wrist, and a spoon halfway to the child's mouth. And she did not startle, and she did not rise, and she was not afraid. She looked up at the Duke of Wrenmoor as though she had been expecting him this past hour, and he was only somewhat late. "You may put your gloves on the table," she said. "He doesn't care for the smell of horses, but he'll forgive you." Gabriel did not move. The child turned its head to consider him, and the firelight caught its eyes, and they were amber. The pale brown that ran in the Asher line, the brown he saw in his own glass each morning, the brown his brother Marcus had carried into a grave 14 months gone. "Whose child is that?" he said. It did not come out as a question. The woman set down the spoon. She shifted the baby against her shoulder with the unthinking ease of long practice, and she met the Duke's eyes. And what she said next took all the air from the room. "His name is Edward," she said. "He has your brother's eyes, and the Asher mark behind his ear, and your family paid a man £40 to be sure you would never stand where you are standing now." She tilted her head a fraction. "They told you he died with his mother. They told me you were the sort of man who would be glad to hear it. One of those things is a lie, Your Grace. I have spent a year wondering which." For a long moment the only sound was the fire and the wet, contented rasp of the child on the rattle. Gabriel made himself look at the rattle, because looking at the child was not yet possible. Silver, coral-handled, the bells long since gone silent under a year of small teeth. And there, worn but legible along the stem, the crest he had been given to suck on himself 30 years before, and the line every Asher heir was christened beneath, "To the next who comes." There had been one made for Marcus, one for Gabriel, the spare, and, he had been told, one buried with a duchess and her stillborn son in the cold of the previous spring. "That rattle was interred," he said. "I was at the service. I stood at the vault." "You stood at a vault," the woman agreed. "There was a coffin in it the length of a loaf of bread, weighted with sand, and I know because I helped weight it. And then I took this one out of his cradle in the dark and walked 12 miles before morning." She said it without heat, the way a woman states the price of flour. "You buried a box, Your Grace. I have been raising the contents. You will tell me your name." "Rosalind Carey." "I was companion to the Duchess, to Sophia. For the first time something moved under the calm, quick and gone. She was my friend. She died asking me to keep her son alive. And I have. And I am not going to give him to a man who rode here with a groom and a purse to make a problem disappear." She rose at last, the child on her hip, and she was not tall, and she did not back away from him by so much as an inch. "So before you say the thing you came to say, the pension, the passage to the colonies, whatever sum your cousin settled on as the cost of my silence, look at the boy. You owe him that. Look, and then tell me he is no kin of yours." And Gabriel looked. The child looked back at him with Marcus's eyes in a face that was Marcus's face in miniature, and reached out one fat wet hand and took hold of the Duke's finger with the absolute confidence of a creature who has never yet been refused. And Gabriel Asher, who had buried his only brother without ever once making peace with him, felt the floor of 14 months tilt and give way. "God in heaven," he said. "He won't help," said Rosalind. "I've asked. Sit down before you fall." He did not sit. He stood by the fire with his brother's son's hand around his finger, and his certainties coming apart. And Rosalind Carey watched him do it with the wariness of a woman who had been disappointed by powerful men before. My cousin Lionel told me, Gabriel said slowly, that a servant had stolen a christening cup and a quantity of plate and fled, and that she was putting it about the county that the Duchess's dead infant had lived, in the hope of extorting the family. He said you were not in your right mind. He said it would be a kindness, quietly done, to see you provided for far away and the matter closed before it shamed Sophia's memory. He looked up. He sent me himself. He pressed it on me. He said I was the only one the family could trust to be discreet. Of course he did. Rosalind sat again, settling Edward against her. Think, Your Grace. Think who is hurt if that child is dead, and who is hurt if he lives. Your brother's lawful son stands first. Then you. Then, a long way back, your cousin Lionel. With the boy in the ground, and you a bachelor with no son of your own. Only your one life stands between Lionel Asher and everything your family owns. She let it land. He did not send you to be kind to me. He sent you because a duke doing his dirty work in a dale leaves no trail back to the man who profits. And if some accident befell the troublesome woman and her brat while the duke happened to be present, why, who would dare ask the duke any questions at all? You are accusing my cousin of murdering an infant. I am telling you he hired it done. And the man he hired had a conscience worth precisely £40, which is what it cost me to buy it back the night Sophia died. Her voice did not rise, but it had gone very flat and old. I am sorry it is your family. I am sorry it is the only family you have left. But I watched a man come up the servants' stair with a pillow folded under his arm, and I am done being gentle about it to spare a gentleman's feelings. Gabriel turned from the fire. I did not know, he said. Rosalind, Miss Carey, before God, I did not know. I believed them. I buried my brother believing we had nothing of him left, and I have spent a year being the duke he would have hated me for becoming, and I am sorry. For Sophia. For the year you have spent alone with this. For believing my cousin over a woman I had never met. I am more sorry than, stop apologizing. She said it sharp, and the baby startled, and she gentled him without looking away from Gabriel. The dead are past your sorrow, and I have had enough of it from better paid men than you. You want to be of use, Your Grace? Then stop telling me how you feel, and tell me what you mean to do. It was, he would think much later, the precise moment he stopped being able to leave. I mean, he said, to keep my brother's son alive. Tell me how. She did not trust him, and she was right not to, and so she made him earn the next 3 days an hour at a time. He slept in the byre, which she pointed out preserved her reputation and his groom's silence in a single stroke. And she thought of both before he did, which shamed him more than he expected. By day he carried water and split wood with hands that had not done either since the war, and the old wound in his right hand ached, and he found he was glad of it. And by the fire at night, when Edward slept in his basket with the silver rattle fallen from his fist, Rosalind told him the shape of the thing, piece by piece, watching to see what he did with each piece before she gave him the next. There was proof. That was what made her dangerous, and what kept her alive, and what she would not yet put in his hands. Sophia knew she was dying, Rosalind said. They sat across the hearth from one another, close enough to speak low, far enough apart to be careful. She had 3 hours after the birth, and she spent them well. She wrote a letter, that Edward was hers and Marcus's, born in lawful wedlock, the date, the hour, the witnesses, that she feared Lionel, that she gave the boy into my keeping. She signed it. The midwife signed it, and the woman who laid out her body signed it, and it is sealed, and it is somewhere your cousin will never look. She turned the rattle over in her fingers, firelight running along to the next who comes. And there is a register. I could not have him grow up a ghost, so I took him to a rector who had loved your brother, and he baptized Edward Asher, son of Marcus, Duke of Wrenmoor, and wrote it in the parish book, in the proper hand on the proper page, dated true. A parish register is law, your grace. It outranks your cousin's word and mine alike. Then we take it before the family lawyers and the boy is restored and Lionel hangs. Listen to you, she said, almost gently. We, as though it was simple. The moment that book is opened, your cousin knows the boy lives. And a man who paid £40 for one murder will not balk at the price of a second. And there is the other thing you keep stepping around. Because you are not a stupid man and you have surely done the sum. She looked at him levelly. If Edward is the true Duke of Wrenmoor, and he is, then you, sir, are not. You are Lord Gabriel Asher, a younger son with a courtesy title and no estate of his own, and everything you have worn for 14 months belongs to a child in a basket. She let the fire crack between them. I have told you the one fact that unmakes you. I wanted to watch your face while you heard it. A man's face when he learns he must give up a dukedom tells you everything you need to know about whether you can trust him with a child. Gabriel looked at the boy in the basket for a long time. I never wanted it, he said at last, and was surprised to find it true. I wanted my brother back, and an argument unsaid, and I got a coronet instead, and I have hated every day of it. You are offering to take the thing I hate most off my hands and hand me my brother's son in its place. He met her eyes. You meant to frighten me, Miss Carey. You have done the opposite. What does my face tell you? Rosalind Carey was quiet a moment, and something in the careful set of her shoulders eased by a degree it had not eased in a year. It tells me, she said, that I have been doing this alone for too long, and reached across the hearth and, very briefly, let her roughened hand rest over his scarred one, and then the wind took the door, and they both startled, and she drew back, and the moment closed over like water, and neither of them said a word about how the air had gone out of the room. It was Edward who broke them, in the end the way the very young break the careful. He woke fevered 2 nights on, teething and miserable, and there was no one but the two of them, and they walked him in turns the whole night through the single low room. Somewhere past 3 Gabriel took the screaming child against his shoulder and found, to his astonishment, that the boy quieted to the low cradle song the Asher nurses had always used, the one Marcus must have had, the one he himself had had, surfacing now out of 30 years of forgetting. Rosalind stood watching him with her arms wrapped around herself and her hair down and her face stripped of all its careful armor by exhaustion. He likes you, she said. I didn't want him to. It would have been easier if you'd been the man your cousin described. It would have been easier, Gabriel said over the boy's head, if you had been the woman he described too. He looked at her across the small warm dark, the child's weight against his heart, and felt the whole shape of his ruined, inconvenient life rearrange itself into something he wanted with an intensity that frightened him. I find I do not want easier, Miss Carey. She crossed half the room toward him without deciding to. He bent toward her over the sleeping child between them, and there was a half-inch, and then there was less, and her breath was warm and her eyes had fallen closed, and Edward stirred and whimpered, and they sprang apart like guilty children, and Rosalind laughed once, unsteadily, and pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. Not over the baby's head, she said. I have some standards left, Lord Gabriel, however few. But she was smiling, and he was smiling, and the thing between them had been named without a word, and could not now be unnamed. It was the last hour of peace they would have for a long time, and afterward Gabriel was glad neither of them had known it. Lionel Asher arrived at noon the following day, with 4 men and a magistrate. Gabriel heard the horses and stepped out into the cold spring light, and there was his cousin in a many-caped greatcoat, descending with the unhurried elegance of a man who has never in his life arrived anywhere he was not master. Cousin. Lionel's pale gaze went past Gabriel to the cottage doorway where Rosalind stood with Edward on her hip. And Gabriel watched the calculation flicker and resolve behind that smooth face, saw the precise instant Lionel understood that the child lived and that the Duke knew it. "Ah, I had hoped to spare you this. I see the creature has had time to fill your head." "Sir Henry," he said to the magistrate, "there is the woman. She abducted a sick infant from Wrenmoor over a year ago and has passed it off in this district as my late cousin's son to extort the family. A sad case, a deranged servant. I'll have the child taken into the family's proper care and the woman bound over to the assizes for the abduction. We need not trouble my cousin the Duke further. He is too tender-hearted for such business." It was beautifully done. The magistrate was already nodding, the men were already moving, and Gabriel saw the whole machinery of rank and law begin to turn exactly as his cousin had built it to turn, with one duke's word against one fallen woman's, and the woman to be carried off before she could say 3 sentences anyone would credit. So, Gabriel Asher burned his life down in front of witnesses. "Stop," he said in the quiet register that was the only thing of the dukedom he had ever found useful, and the men stopped. "Sir Henry, attend me, for I am about to give you the most ruinous evidence of my life, and I will give it on my honor as a gentleman and a soldier." He did not look at Lionel. He looked at the magistrate, and then at the small dark-headed boy in Rosalind Carey's arms. "That child is Edward Asher, lawful son of my late brother Marcus, Duke of Wrenmoor, and his Duchess Sophia. He did not die. He was meant to die, and the man who paid for it stands at your elbow in a very fine coat. The boy is the true Duke of Wrenmoor. Which means, Sir Henry, that I am not the Duke at all, and have not been for one single day, and I renounce here, before you, every right and revenue I have wrongly held, because I would rather be Lord Gabriel Asher with a clear name than the Duke of Wrenmoor over my brother's murdered son." The silence was absolute. "You are unwell," Lionel said, very softly. "I have never," said Gabriel, "been more myself." And Rosalind Carey stepped forward into the cold light with the heir of Wrenmoor on her hip and the silver rattle in her free hand, and said to the magistrate, "There is proof, Sir Henry. Written, witnessed, and entered in a parish register in the proper hand. I have kept it a year against this exact morning. Will you hear it, or will you take a duke's cousin's word and let the rest go unspoken into a grave the size of a loaf of bread?" What she had not reckoned on was how fast a cornered man could move. Lionel did not argue the proof. He did the colder thing. He agreed to it. "By all means," he said smoothly, "let it be examined, at Wrenmoor, by the family's own people, with the child in the family's own keeping, while the lawyers do their slow work. Sir Henry, you cannot mean to leave a possible duke in a hovel with the very woman accused of stealing him. Whatever the truth, the boy is plainly of consequence. He must be secured." And the magistrate, who wanted nothing more than to be quit of a matter so far above his weight, seized on it with relief. The child would go to Wrenmoor under the family's guardians. Miss Carey, against whom an accusation of abduction yet stood unanswered, would not. They took Edward out of Rosalind's arms in the cottage doorway. She did not scream. She had stopped being a woman who screamed a long time ago. She stood with her emptied arms still half curved around the shape of him, and her face gone white to the lips. And Gabriel, Lord Gabriel now, a man who had just thrown away every scrap of authority that might have stopped this, could do nothing but stand and watch the child carried to a strange carriage by his cousin's men, the silver rattle dropping from the small fist into the mud, and the door of the coach shutting on a year of nights. "He'll be at Wrenmoor before dark," Lionel said pleasantly, mounting. "Accidents are so common in great houses. Cousin, stairs, fevers. You of all men know how easily an Asher heir can simply fail to survive the spring." He gathered his reins. "You had a dukedom this morning. You have a muddy yard and a hysterical servant tonight. I did try to spare you. The carriage pulled away north with the true Duke of Wrenmoor inside it, and Rosalind sank to her knees in the cold and picked the rattle out of the mud and held it against her chest, and Gabriel knelt beside her, and for a moment neither of them could find the bottom of it. Then Rosalind wiped the mud from the engraving with her thumb, to the next who comes, and her face, when she lifted it, was not broken. It was the face of a woman doing arithmetic. He made one mistake, she said. He has one. He has the boy. He does not have the letter, and he does not have the register, and he does not have the rector who wrote it. She got to her feet, drying the rattle on her skirt. He thinks proof is paper that can be burned at leisure. He has forgotten that proof is people who can speak. Get up, Lord Gabriel. We are going to Wrenmoor, and we are not going quietly, and we are going to get there before dark. They reached Wrenmoor as the family assembled in the great hall, and they did not come alone. Gabriel had ridden ahead and roused the county on the strength of a name that, ruined or not, still opened doors. And so when Lionel Asher carried the child into the hall to present a sad necessary tale to the gathered family and their lawyers, he found the room already full. The family solicitor, 2 magistrates now and not one, 3 gentlemen of the neighbourhood who had loved the late Duke, and, in the doorway, a stooped grey rector with an enormous parish register under his arm. Rosalind Carey walked into the centre of the hall of the house she had fled in the dark, and she did not wait to be given leave to speak. She had waited a year. She was done waiting. My name is Rosalind Carey, and I was companion to Sophia, Duchess of Wrenmoor, and I held her hand while she died. Her voice carried to the rafters without rising. The hall went still around it. Before she died, she wrote this. She laid the sealed letter on the long table. Her hand. The midwife's hand. The hand of the woman who washed her body. Open it, Mr. Pell, to the solicitor, and read whose son she swears the child to be, and whose name she begged me to keep him from. She set the silver rattle beside it. The heir's rattle. The one that was buried, except it was not, for here it is, and you may match the crest to your records. And the register. The rector laid the great book open with a trembling hand, entered the proper day in the proper place. Edward Asher, son of Marcus and Sophia, baptized in the sight of God a fortnight after his birth, a year before any man in this room was told the lie that he had died. The solicitor read the Duchess's letter aloud in a voice that shook, and when he reached the line that named Lionel Asher, the hall turned the way a tide turns, all at once and past stopping, and Rosalind crossed the floor to where Lionel stood with the child stiff in his unaccustomed arms, and she looked up at the man who had sent a pillow up a servant's stair. And she said the thing she had carried for a year. You folded the pillow over the wrong cradle, Mr. Asher, she said, clear and terrible and calm. I had already moved him. You smothered a bolster and called it an heir, and went down to your dinner. Everything since, the box of sand, the false grave, the £40, the kind cousin sent to a dale to finish me. All of it has been you trying to make true the murder you only thought you'd done. She held out her arms. Give me the Duke of Wrenmoor. You have held him quite long enough. For one breath, Lionel Asher looked around the hall for an ally and found, in the faces of the family he had counted on, only horror. Then his nerve broke, and he thrust the child at her and bolted for the door, and ran straight into the 2 magistrates and 3 angry gentlemen, who had been waiting the whole speech for exactly that. Gabriel reached Rosalind and the boy as the men closed on his cousin, and Edward, restored to the only arms in the world he trusted, looked over Rosalind's shoulder at the man who had sung to him in the dark, and reached out one fat hand and said, with the sublime indifference of his age to all titles whatsoever, Up. I told you he likes you. Rosalind said, and her voice finally cracked, and her eyes were streaming, and she was laughing. Gabriel took his brother's son onto his own shoulder and put his free arm around the woman who had saved him, there in the full sight of the county, a man who had thrown away a dukedom that morning and could not for the life of him remember why he had ever wanted it. "Marry me," he said into her hair. "I have nothing now but a courtesy title and a great deal of love and a nephew who needs raising. It is a poor offer, Rosalind, take it anyway." "Gabriel," she said the first time, his name, and it went through him like a struck bell. "I have been raising your nephew alone for a year, waiting for someone worth the help. I am not going to refuse the only man who came." And she kissed him, in front of the magistrates and the lawyers and the scandalized family and the wide amber eyes of the Duke of Wrenmoor, who watched his guardian and his aunt to be with great interest, and then, bored, put the silver rattle back in his mouth. They were married that summer in the small church whose register had saved a duke, by the stooped rector who had written the line that undid a murderer, with no special license and no haste, because there was no longer anything they needed to outrun. A year on, Rosalind stood at the nursery window of Wrenmoor on a bright autumn morning and watched her husband teach the young duke to walk across the lawn, a tottering, furious, magnificent progress. 3 steps and a fall and a roar of outrage, and 3 steps more. Lord Gabriel Asher bent double behind his nephew, with his scarred hands hovering an inch from the small shoulders. Ready. Never quite touching, letting the boy fall and letting the boy rise. Lionel Asher had not hanged, in the end, though it had been a near thing. The family, to spare the name, had let him plead to the lesser charge, and he had been transported to New South Wales for the term of his natural life, where a cousin of the family wrote that he kept the accounts of a penal settlement and was very ill, and was not expected to trouble the world much longer. Rosalind found she could not summon either pity or triumph over it. She had a child to raise. The dead were past her sorrow. She had said so to a duke in a cottage once, and she had meant it. And she meant it still. On the nursery mantel, where the morning sun reached it, stood the silver rattle. Edward had outgrown it. He had a wooden horse now, and opinions, and a temper that was pure Marcus. But Rosalind had not put the rattle away. It sat in the light beneath the engraving she had read 1,000 times in the dark. "To the next who comes," waiting, the way it had always waited, for whoever came next. Below on the lawn, Edward took 6 whole steps and stayed up, and flung both arms over his head in triumph, and Gabriel caught him and swung him laughing into the bright air, and looked up at the window and found his wife watching, and smiled at her the way he had smiled at her once across a stranger's fire, with a sick baby between them and his whole ruined wanted life ahead of him. Rosalind Carey, who had walked 12 miles in the dark with a duke under her shawl and never once looked back, lifted the rattle off the mantel into the sun and went down to her family.